The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. It cut through the hum of the fluorescent lights like a needle. I remember the sound because nothing else makes noise at that hour, just the cooler compressor and my own breath when you start to notice it. I was folding an end cap, the big packs of paper towels, thinking about how I had to be up at 6 for my second job. Night shifts feel like a bubble. Everything outside seems distant, like it belongs to someone else. You get into a rhythm, wipe, stock, sweep. You learn what is normal and what isn't, so when the voice on the other end said, "Are you alone?" it didn't feel like a prank at first. There was static, like someone talking through a bad connection, and there was a laugh that didn't reach the eyes. I said, "Yeah," because that's what you say when the phone rings and you're half asleep and the person on the other end sounds weird but not dangerous. I told myself it was a bored kid driving past or some drunk. I told myself a lot of things that night. He kept talking. Not anything real, just these half-phrases. "Do you like being alone?" It must be nice to have all that light on and no one around. He described the inside of the store in ways that were small but specific. The aisle with the cheap coffee, the dent in the cigarette display, the way the soda machine made a cough before it accepted $1. I remember my stomach dropping when he named the dent. I wasn't surprised he could see it on the cameras, but I hadn't mentioned it on the call. I hadn't even told my manager about the dent, because it wasn't worth reporting. I felt like a moth circling a dim lamp. Something about the voice made me watch the monitor instead of answering. I called out, "Hello?" like it would change things. The voice laughed and said, "You're doing great," then hung up. I checked the cameras. Grainy boxes on the screen, timestamp in the corner. My breath fogged the tiny pane when I leaned in too close. There was nothing unusual for a minute. A car at pump 2, a shadow that could have been my reflection, then a flash at the edge of the lot, a figure crossing from the right, moving in that slow, patient way people move when they are studying something. I watched the frame, heart pacing, as the figure passed out of view behind the building. For a second, I convinced myself I was being ridiculous, that I had imagined the dent he had described because I'd just memorized the store's mess. But the voice had known more. He'd known things he had no reason to know. The calls kept coming. Sometimes 5 minutes apart, sometimes 15, sometimes just heavy breathing. Once, a click, and then the sound of a door opening and closing, far away, like the caller was walking around outside the store and messing with things. Each time the phone lit up, every tiny sound seemed larger. The hum of the lights, the tick of the ice machine, everything conspired to remind me how alone I was. At one point, I walked the sales floor even though I didn't want to. The tiles were cold under my sneakers. The store smelled like coffee grounds and bleach. I remember running my hand along the cigarette display and feeling the old dent with my fingertips just to prove to myself it existed. On the monitor, the shadow reappeared. A slow step, a pause. He was looking directly at the camera for a long, long beat. And then he did something that made my mouth go dry. He smiled. It was the wrong kind of smile, like someone who knows something private and is savoring it, like a secret that was not meant for me. He moved out of frame and the feed stuttered. When it came back, he was gone. I locked the front doors early. I don't know why. Maybe because of the calls. Maybe because the smile had been that precise kind of wrong. My manager said nothing when I told him on the phone. He sighed and told me not to make a thing out of it. "We get prank calls," he said. "Don't give them what they want." But the cameras, and my eyes, had seen the man. He'd been real. He'd been in the lot. He had gone around the side of the building and vanished into the dark. I started my car with my hands shaking. I kept waiting for some movement at the edge of the lot. Maybe a silhouette stepping out from behind a dumpster. Maybe a figure leaning on my bumper. The wind carried the scent of wet pavement. As I pulled onto the main road, headlights carved the night into strips of white. I told myself repeatedly that I was being paranoid, that the man had been a homeless guy, or someone who needed help, or a random creep looking to scare someone who worked nights. But then, as I turned onto the highway ramp, I saw him. He was standing by the side of the road, one hand in his coat pocket, his face turned toward my car, as if he'd been waiting. I don't know why he didn't run. I don't know why he didn't call out. He just walked toward me in a purposeful, calm way, like someone who expected me to stop. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. My hands locked the steering wheel. My heart was a fist. I floored it. Maybe it wasn't the smartest move. Maybe I should have driven to a police station or a firehouse or somewhere with lights. But when your body remembers danger, you do what it tells you. I couldn't breathe. I told myself I would stop at the next light. I told myself I would call the non-emergency number and tell someone about the strange man. What I did was keep driving, hands trembling, eyes on the rearview mirror. He didn't follow. He watched, shoulders straight, and when my taillights disappeared, he turned and melted into the darkness behind the trees. The next week, I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the apartment building sounded like footsteps at the pump. I called my manager again. He watched the footage, squinted and said, "There's nothing here, just a guy walking a dog or something." The camera angle had missed the part where the man had ducked behind the dumpster. Whatever footage might have proved me right looked inconclusive to the person with grey hair and the four-figure salary who had learned to make alarms a liability rather than a help. I quit after 2 more shifts. I told him I was moving to day hours. He asked why. The answer was obvious to me and embarrassing to him. I don't feel safe. I remember my manager's eyes flicking to the door like he wanted to tell me about turnover statistics and how we couldn't always accommodate people. He didn't argue. He just wrote my resignation down on a sticky note and handed it back as if that made the choice official. Leaving felt like rage and relief tangled together. People ask why you walk away from a paycheck. They say courage or weakness, depending on their own closeness to the dark. I know what it did to me. I know the way my hands shook the next time the phone rang at home. I know the way I jump when a car pulls into the lot I pass on the way to work. I don't know the name of the caller or the man who smiled. I don't even know if they were the same person. But I know the way he said my store's little details, as if he'd been inside. I know the smile on the monitor. I know how small and hollow the world felt after that. If that sent chills through you, wait until you hear how a single $100 bill became a signal, a warning that made the bartender in the next story lock her back door and watch a van leave with people who didn't belong to the neighborhood. Before I get to that, quick thing. If you want more real night shift horror like this, hit subscribe. I'll keep sharing these, and it helps to know someone else is listening. Cadence was always the kind of person who expected the night to be weird. She'd worked the bar at the Red Door for almost 3 years, mostly midweek shifts, mostly late. It was a dive, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed and the ashtrays were full by 8. Regulars had names like Truck Guy and Piano, and everyone knew the rules. No big fights, no bringing trouble in, and if something went wrong, you got on the phone and called someone who could fix it. She told me about the night it started with a bill. A man she described as well-dressed, not flashy, just clean-cut and calm, sat at the bar and ordered something simple. He had a watch that caught light when he checked it. He laid a $100 bill on the counter, that small, deliberate gesture that meant something more than paying for the drink. Maybe it was a test. Maybe it was to make people look. On a night when the jukebox kept a slow, low beat and the smoke clung to the ceiling, that bill stole the room's attention like a flare. He spoke to her in a casual way. Compliments, a little chuckle, small talk that felt practiced. He left before closing. Cadence went home thinking of how men like that tended to be the ones who later delivered trouble with a smile and a plan. She wasn't wrong. A week later, He came back, with a woman, 2 people now. They sat in a booth near the back and said things that sounded rehearsed. "We host private events," the woman said, and smiled like she wanted to be trusted. She called Cadence over and, in a tone that was almost a script, asked if Cadence would consider a special night. She mentioned tips and exclusivity and how little it would take to make a good amount of money. It felt like a job solicitation, like an offer from someone who had done this before. Cadence's instincts tripped. Something in the way the man and woman exchanged glances made her skin prick. They paid cash. They left with the kind of slow swagger people use when they know a system. They paused by the door like they were checking each other's pockets. A van idled outside. Cadence watched it from the barroom window. It wasn't flashy. It looked used, the kind that had seen a lot of miles. There was a moment when the van's engine died and the headlights flicked. Then the wind picked up, and the boardwalk outside whispered like dry leaves. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the chairs turned upside down on the tables, there was a sound at the back door. It was the clatter of heavy hands on metal. Cadence knew every sound the place made, learned them like a second language. This sound didn't belong. It wasn't a customer calling or someone dropping change. It was a hand finding the latch and shaking it. Her mouth went dry. She thought of the van parked across the street, of the $100 bill, of the couple that had seemed to own the space of the room for a little while. She bolted the door and slid the lock into place. Her fingers felt clumsy. She called the owner first, a text, then a phone call, and he told her to call the police if she thought someone was trying to get in. The bar had an old panic button under the register, and a camera system that looked like something from a thrift store catalogue. The feeds grainy and delayed, but better than nothing. Cadence pushed the button, not because she trusted the owner to do anything, but because pressing it felt like action. On the monitor, shadows moved with intention. One figure leaned into the back window, felt the glass, and then stepped back. The sound of the van's door rattling like it was being jostled made her breathe shallow. She called 911. "Someone's at my door," she said, voice tight. "They're trying to open it." "Can you see them on camera?" the dispatcher asked. "Yeah," she said. I think they're wearing masks." That was the word she hated. Masks. It made her feel like she was in a movie instead of a place she lived. It made her feel less in control. She kept watching the screen. Someone was testing a latch on the back door. Someone knocked with a tool. The window rattled. The van's silhouette sat under a sodium lamp like a sleeping animal waiting to be fed. Her manager arrived within the hour, breath fogging in the cold, flashlight in hand. He clicked through the footage and frowned. Cadence felt the adrenaline hang in her body like a bad smell. "Stay put," he told her. "I'll handle this." He didn't want to be the one to say out loud what it might mean. He wanted to be the person who fixed things. He wasn't always good at that. Security footage later showed people, not just the man and the woman, but others, moving like a coordinated group. They were careful. They coordinated around the shop's blind spots, checking angles, making gestures almost too quick to catch. At one point, a figure cupped a hand to a window and looked in like they were reading a name tag. Then the van pulled away with neat precision, and the license plate blurred on the footage. Later, the plate would show up as unregistered. Cadence told me about how small details stuck in her head. The smell of oil and old cigarettes on the man's coat, the woman's perfume that smelled like wintergreen, the way the van's driver kept glancing at the sidewalk as if timing mattered. She told me she thought they had been watching her for more than a night. That made sense in the way that predators do their homework. You can't terrify someone if you don't know what scares them. But there was something else that she couldn't shake. A feeling like being watched after they left. She would lock the bar early sometimes just to sit at the back and check the parking lot. She started counting cars as a method of calming down. 9, 10, 11. She'd watch the van spot and wait for that familiar silhouette that would never return. The police took the footage and asked questions. She gave statements. She answered the detectives with the sort of precise honesty that comes from seeing people who know how to lie. They asked about past incidents, if she'd been threatened before, if she had enemies, if the bar had cameras that were reliable. The questions felt like a sieve sifting through what she knew and what she didn't. No one ever asked the important one. How did they know her schedule? How did they know exactly when she would be alone? When the detectives left, they told her they'd follow up. They told her to be careful. The owner never scheduled her to work alone again. That helped in a way, but it did not heal the raw feeling of edges. I stopped Cadence there in the story for a long time because there is a certain way real-time fear lingers. A hush before the chase. She told me that for weeks afterwards she would hover near the door, keys in her hand, watching. People think the worst part is the night they almost get taken, or the moment you see a stranger's face pressed to the glass. For some of us, the worst part is the routine breaking, the keys that stay in your pocket for years, the door you won't shut until there are two other people on the other side. But the van didn't disappear into a simple drama. It left a mark. The footage showed hands coordinating, but it didn't show faces. The plates were unregistered. Cadence didn't know if the men and women who had come were looking for her specifically, or if she was a convenient mark. I remember her voice trailing when she said, "It felt planned." That was the word that mattered. Planned. It's quiet now where I sit and tell you this, but I can feel Cadence's hands in my memory, the way they fumbled with the keys, the way they fisted in her coat pocket. I can see the back door of the bar in my mind, the warped wood and the little mail slot, and I can hear the rustle of someone trying to make that door give in. You'd think, after the camera footage and the reports, someone would have found the van, someone would have tracked it, someone would have pieced together the faces, but the police came back and said they'd checked registration and had no hits. The owner was irritated that he'd had to close his doors for an hour. They upgraded a lock. They bought a new light for the alley. Small comforts, but they were better than nothing. Cadence quit before the end of the month. Not because the owners pushed her out, but because the bar, that had once felt like a place where she could hold a late-night job, no longer felt safe. She said she couldn't explain the exact reason to anyone who hadn't watched the footage. "It's the choreography," she told me. "They had a rhythm, and they knew how to make me look away so they could move. And that rhythm showed a pattern, a $100 bill, a practiced smile, a van that looked ordinary but wasn't, hands that knew how to test a door without setting off an alarm." The pattern was the thing that bound all the stories I was collecting that week, a sequence of small everyday actions used as tools for something ugly. Cadence's story didn't end with a name on a file or a person in handcuffs. It ended with her refusing to be alone behind that bar anymore. She took a day shift at a restaurant a few blocks over and spent her nights sleeping with the curtains closed. Even now, when she walks past the red door, she checks the alley. She catalogues vehicles in her head, watching for any that are too clean for the street. I wanted to press her for more, to know how long they'd been shadowing her, whether there were other women who'd been approached, if they'd tried similar tricks elsewhere. But sometimes there are pieces that are missing, because the people who have them don't want to talk, and sometimes the police have pieces they won't reveal. I respected that. This is where I'm going to stop for a moment. The van image sat in my head like a blot of ink on a page, spreading with every retelling. There are more nights, more calls, more cameras, and more ways people find you when you're alone under fluorescent lights. The next story I have is another gas station one, a cold night, a car that shouldn't have been there, and the discovery that a vehicle can be the staging point for something you never expected. But before I move on, I want you to feel how ordinary it all looks on the surface. A bill on a counter, a well-dressed man, a van in the dark. Little things that, when threaded together, make a lifeline snap. The night I was told the next story, the person telling it kept pausing, like they were watching the footage in their head. They said, "You wouldn't believe the way it looked at first. It was like the car was waiting for us to look away." That sentence, waiting for us to look away, is the one that will bring you back into the kind of dread that sticks to your throat. I'm going to pick up that thread next. The car was just there, at first glance, like any other broken-down vehicle left to cool on the shoulder. It sat under the same yellow bulb that lit the pump, engine cold, fog settling on the windows. I remember the way the heater in my jacket didn't seem to work anymore, like the cold had found a way to get past fabric and into my bones. It was the kind of night where the rest of the world felt like it belonged to someone else. Houses dark, few trucks on the highway, and that wide, empty stretch of lot that always made my shadow look like a stranger. I'd stepped outside to clear my head, to check the cobwebs behind the air pump and lean against the concrete island for a second. The man by the car looked normal in the way that makes you lower your guard. Tired, hunched over the bumper, pulling something loose. He said, "Car trouble," like it was a fact and nothing more, and when I asked if he needed a tow, he shrugged and said he was waiting on a friend. I could have walked away. I could have said, "Go down the road. There's a gas station with a guy inside," and kept folding fuel maps and sweeping gum wrappers underfoot. But he smiled in the kind of tired way that asks for forgiveness for taking your time. For a minute, I felt like I was doing a kindness. I walked back inside and tried to keep my routine, sweeping, logging till buttons, glancing at the monitor out of habit. That screen is a small, blue window into the world when you're working nights. You learn to trust it in the way you trust a watch. It will show you the pump lights, cars that come and go, the paint on the curbs. On camera, the car had been there for 10 minutes, then 20. A figure crouched by the rear bumper and stayed there, shoulders moving with something that could have been work or could have been something else. My stomach tightened. I went outside again, partly to check if they were actually okay, partly because I told myself I shouldn't be making assumptions at 2 in the morning. He said his friend was inside someplace I couldn't see. He mentioned being from out of town. He mentioned that he only needed a jump. There was a pause where he watched the lot, like he was checking the perimeter. He seemed to be counting exits. I remember thinking that was absurd. How do you count exits at a gas station? But we do little things to reassure ourselves. I told him I could call someone. He said no. He handed me a few dollars for the heater, then asked if he could sit by the pump for a minute. I told him that was fine. On the monitor, I saw another car pull in behind pump 3. A different man got out, hood up. He crouched near the wheel well like he was looking for something. The two men kept to themselves. For a little while, nothing felt off in the way you expect a night shift to feel off. Slow, repetitive, empty. Then a third shadow flicked across the frame and paused at the edge of the property, where the trees start and the highway hums like a far-off animal. On the screen, it looked like someone reading the lot like a map. That's when I went on the move. Maybe I should have called someone first. Maybe I should have kept the C-store door locked and the fluorescent lights buzzing and let the cameras be the witness they were meant to be. But I had a key ring heavy in my pocket, something about that weight, making me trust my feet. I walked outside with the flashlight, and the air hit my face, sharp and metallic. The crouched figure straightened when he saw me. The other car's driver said something that sounded casual. The man at the car said, "My buddy will be here." His voice had a tone that made me feel small. I kept my distance. I asked questions that were supposed to sound easy. I called the non-emergency line on my store phone and explained we had a disabled vehicle in the lot. "How far out are you?" the dispatcher asked. I gave the cross streets. They said they'd send someone, but I could tell from the way their voice softened that they were not tripping on their shoes to get there. Then, like a cut in a cheap movie, the crouched figure moved away from the bumper and toward the tree line. He didn't hurry. He stepped like someone who had practiced the motion 100 times. Quiet, precise, deliberate. The other man watched him go, and then closed the trunk with a soft thud, hands lingering as if to make sure nothing had been left behind. There was a small exchange I couldn't make out on the monitor. 2 silhouettes, one hand pointing, one head nodding. I told myself I could still call it in. I pressed the panic alarm under the register with my thumb. You don't realize how small that button feels until you need it. You press it and expect a siren, some immediate flurry of professionals. What you get often is a few minutes of radio static and a dispatcher voice, calm as if reading from the instruction manual of the world. The alarm made a sound in the store meant to be inconspicuous, a soft chime for employees and a silent flag for the patrol line. I told myself it would be enough to make them think twice. When I turned back to look at the lot, the crouched figure was gone. The car was still there, passenger window rolled about an inch down. For a breathless moment I thought someone might be sleeping inside, or that we'd find a stranded family huddled in blankets. The passenger door was open a crack. When I shone my flashlight through the gap, the interior looked normal. Empty jacket on the seat, a crumpled paper cup in the holder. The driver's seatbelt hung out like a hand. It wasn't until I saw the shallow indent in the upholstery that matched the shape of a body that I realized someone must have been inside recently. I went around the car slowly. The gravel under my shoes felt suspiciously loud. At the edge of the lot there were fresh prints, a scuff in the dirt leading toward the tree line, like a trail someone used to disappear. The other car was gone, vanished, like it had never been there. On the camera the feed had a glitch, an odd smear where the crouched figure had been, and then the frame rewound a few seconds, like the world wanted to let me look again. There were no faces to match to the hands that had moved so carefully. There were no license plates clear enough to read. When the police finally arrived, the officer clicked through the footage, squinted, and said the words, "Night shift workers know in their bones." Could be kids messing around. Could be vagrants. He wasn't rude. He was doing the job of someone who has seen things that sometimes have explanations. He placed a flashlight on my counter and said they'd run the VIN if there was one. They towed the car. Later, the detective called and said the plates, when finally pulled, traced back to a car reported stolen from several counties over. One of those notices that made the hair on my arms stand up, taken more than 100 miles away. The open passenger door suggested someone had been in the car and left in a rush, or had been helped out. The ideas tumbled in my head like stones. I think what scared me most wasn't the crouched man or the stolen vehicle. It was the idea that the car had been a stage set. It was a prop, a place to hide, a place to wait, a place to make the normal seem coarse and unsafe. The fact that a vehicle could cross county lines and be left at my pump with a person inside was a kind of planning that felt colder than any winter wind. Someone had driven it a long distance. Someone had staged it here. Someone had used my lot as a part of a map I wasn't aware I was on. After the police left and the towed car's taillights disappeared, the lot felt changed. There was the same sodium glare and the same hum of the refrigerators, but the trust was stripped like paint. I couldn't stand still for long in the store without imagining feet in the dark. My manager came in the next day and said they'd file a report and change locks and maybe get a guard to check the property every so often. The official words are the easiest to give, forms to fill, boxes to tick. They told me it was probably nothing organized, probably an opportunistic thing, and that people always tend to make sense of randomness by finding a pattern, like they wanted me to take comfort. But the evidence had enough shape to turn my comfort into a thin film. I remember standing in the fluorescent light with a cup of coffee gone cold and thinking about the distance that car had traveled. Who had left it? Who had used it as a staging area? The detective didn't accuse anyone. He said things like, "We suspect and we'll look into it," which are phrases that leave a space in the story that never gets filled. They are the gaps that sit in your mouth when you try to taste what happened. I quit not long after. I told them I couldn't do nights anymore. It's funny how decisions are sometimes made by the smallest number of pushes. One too many late cars, one more glitch on the monitor, the thud of a trunk. Quitting felt like an admission of defeat in some ways, and an act of self-preservation in others. The nights had begun to feel like a line you'd cross at your own risk. People ask me why I left a steady job for something that might pay less. They ask as if money is the only argument left, but it's not. When someone uses a car as a decoy, when a vehicle shows up with the wrong provenance, you don't just lose work. You lose a sense of home in the place you thought was routine. For weeks, I checked my rearview mirror on the drive home like a nervous animal. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would go back when the season changed, when the days were longer. But that when never came. The nights had taught me something, that tools of convenience, cars, vans, phones, can be turned into tools of threat, and that the people who use them often understand human patterns better than we like to admit. To them, the gas station is a node on a map of opportunity. A few weeks after I left, the detective called me again. He had a lead. Someone had been arrested for a string of break-ins using similar vehicles. The car at my station, he said, fit the timeline of a broader pattern. Maybe they'd catch the ones who left it behind. Maybe they wouldn't. The call felt like both closure and unfinished business. A coin tossed in the air that landed with a whisper rather than a clunk. I never found out if the person in the passenger seat had meant me harm, or if they had been waiting for a ride. The open door stayed in my memory like a question that wouldn't get answered. Who had been there, and why did they leave so quickly? That image stayed with me, and followed the pattern I'd been seeing in the other stories I collected. Mundane objects and simple gestures used like knives. A phone call, $100 bill, a staged car. Everything ordinary turned sharp because someone had decided to weaponize the ordinary. The more I listened to other people, the more I realized how often the things that seem like small marks on our nights are actually parts of someone else's plan. There was one more story I heard that wrapped the pattern up in a different way. Not a van or a parked car, but a human smile used as bait in the middle of an enormous fluorescent maze of a store. The person who told me about it worked night stocking shelves in a place that feels huge and hollow after midnight. She sounded practiced at explaining how something that looked like kindness slipped into something else entirely. She said it was the kind of night when the retail lights turn everything flat and honest, where the only sound is the beeping of the scanner and the faraway rumble of store music. A man kept reappearing in the same aisle for hours, not shopping, just standing, looking at whatever shelf he chose as if memorizing it. She felt watched. People working nights get this sixth sense. They can tell when a presence is merely there and when a presence is waiting. Her radio fizzled out that night. She was supposed to check in every hour. She tried the handset and got nothing but static, like two tin cans with a string between them. You learn to attribute small failures to equipment when you're on the night shift. Wiring dies, batteries run low, and sometimes the radio is just dead. She didn't think anything of it until the man who'd been lingering in the aisle walked toward the end cap where she was stocking. He leaned on a cart and looked at her like he'd seen her before. That look smelled of focus, like someone studying a script. She said she kept her head down and stacked boxes, but the man kept turning up near her. He never said anything. Once his eyes tracked her, as if measuring the pace at which she moved. The store has cameras every few feet, but they are grainy and often angled to capture barcodes more than faces. For a while, it's easy to conflate watchful customers with creepers. You can't always tell until the moment it matters. Where it crossed the line was when a woman appeared. She came out of nowhere like a favor offered and folded into the conversation with a voice that sounded like comfort. "Hey," she said, like someone greeting an old friend. She grabbed the narrator's arm in a way that at first felt affectionate, 2 fingers pressing like a familiar hold, and said, "Hey, it's me. Remember, we met at a party, don't you remember?" Her voice warmed the air, the sort of memory-laced attention that makes you feel seen. She used the narrator's name. That name was the Nail. How did she know it? The narrator hadn't been wearing a name tag that night. Could someone have watched a security clip from earlier? Did she have an employee badge? The woman was emphatic, and when she squeezed the narrator's arm, she leaned in and whispered something that made the narrator freeze. "He's been recording you." The words were absurd in the way that made your stomach drop. Recording you? Why would anyone do that? Was it a misremembered phrase from a movie? It felt dangerous either way. The woman took the narrator's hand and steered her toward a service corridor that led to a less trafficked exit, the kind of way that relies on trust. If someone looks like a friend, you let them guide you. The woman spoke quickly, smiling, and said there was someone outside who would take her where she needed to go. The bright light of the store felt suddenly dim. The narrator tried to pull back. She said no. The woman insisted. Her voice lowered and the grip on the arm tightened. There was a pressure behind the lines, an urgency that made the narrator's chest clamp. She could see through the little glass window of the corridor that a man waited near the rear exit, just out of sight behind the trucks. That man had been the one she'd noticed lingering in the store. Now he seemed far too close for comfort. Something clicked in the narrator's head and she yelled. It was a lone sound, sharp and raw. People turned at first as if from a bad movie scene, and then as if to see if they should be concerned. One of the stock clerks ran toward them, and another employee came out of the break room, blinking sleep from his eyes. The woman dropped the hold when those lights hit, and the man at the exit jogged back into the shadow of the loading docks. The narrator's voice cracked as she called out that someone had tried to lead her out the back. Security footage later showed the woman and the man walking in together, a casual pair who entered like any other late-night shoppers. They matched the narrator's description, the woman's face open and friendly, the man's posture patient. The woman had known the narrator's name. How she got it? Through a social profile, through overhearing, through the man who'd been watching, no one could say for certain. The police called it a failed abduction attempt. They said it looked planned. The thing that stuck with the narrator wasn't the adrenaline or the way co-workers fanned out to make sure she was all right. It wasn't the hurried police report. It was the intimacy of the touch. The way someone who wanted to lead her away had learned how to feel like a memory. There was an incisiveness to the method. Use familiarity to lower suspicion, then move when it's quiet. The words, "He's been recording you," were the blade. The claim that someone had already captured her on camera, and that made her feel like she had been exposed without consent, that she had become, without knowing it, a subject of study. Weeks later, the store manager installed extra cameras and a new radio system. They emphasized buddy shifts, more folks on the floor together, and making sure that people weren't alone in those service corridors. The narrator stopped taking the back exit alone. She started refusing to work after midnight without someone else on the schedule. The change was small in practical terms, but huge in the way it altered the narrator's map of the world. A place once navigated by habit was now toured with caution. When I first heard her tell the story, I could feel the hair on my arms rise. It's one thing to hear about a van or a staged car. It's another to imagine a person you trust, or think you trust, pulling you by the sleeve and telling you a lie that sounds exactly like concern. They had used the language of friendship as cover. They had named her in a way that made the danger personal. The few minutes after her yell were the slowest of her life, the kind of time that stretches like chewing gum until your jaw aches. Police never explained how the woman knew her name. They asked about social media handles and about whether the narrator had mentioned her schedule publicly. The narrator said sometimes she'd scroll through replies at home. Sometimes she'd joke with customers about what shift she worked. but no lead ever made the pieces click cleanly. The woman and the man were both in the footage at the entrance, walking together as if they'd been shopping or passing time. That they had coordinated to make one a lure was where this story met the others I'd collected. Predators choosing roles to make people move where they wanted them to move. After it was over, the narrator told me she felt like her life was a room with the lights on, but all the doors unlatching in secret. She checked the surveillance footage herself, frame by frame, seeing the woman approach the cart, and the way her smile softened. She kept replaying the whisper about being recorded. She kept wondering whether privacy in public places is an illusion or a tool. She felt violated in a way that had nothing to do with physical touch, and everything to do with the presumption someone had made that she could be moved like a chess piece. All 4 stories, my own gas station calls, Cadence's $100 bill and the van, the abandoned stolen car that acted like a stage, and the near abduction in the fluorescent aisles, shared a horrible clarity when you put them together. The people who do this know patterns. They read the routines of those who work alone at night, and they exploit the holes. They use money, courteous speech, broken vehicles, and staged accidents. They slip in favor and familiarity, and watch how quickly you fall into a cadence of trust. After a while, you begin to notice the small rituals you didn't realize you had. I started driving different routes at night. Cadence refused to work solo. The attendant who found the stolen car never went back to nights. The Walmart worker stopped using the back exit unless someone walked her out. We all made adjustments that felt more like bandages than solutions. The police promised follow-ups. Some investigations led to arrests, others closed with a note that no suspects were identified. The law can only chase the pieces people leave behind. It can't always answer the question of who watched you or why you were chosen. What stays with me most is how ordinary everything looked right up until the moment it didn't. The phone that chimed at 2:17 a.m. sounded like a sleepy interruption, not a threat. A $100 bill on a bar was just a generous act until it became a lure. A car stalled at a pump is an annoyance until it's the stage for something else. A friendly squeeze on the arm can be comfort until it's complicit in a plan. The tools are small. The choreography is quiet. The outcomes are messy. Sometimes, when I drive past the places where these stories happened, I look at the parking lots the way you look at a neighborhood of houses after a storm. You can see which ones have boarded windows, which porches are empty, which sidewalks are clean. It used to be that night shift work felt like a secret life, like you were part of a club that paid you for sacrifice. Now it's more like a ledger where expenses are paid in attention and safety. I don't mean to suggest that every night shift is dangerous, or that every stranger is a threat. Most nights there is nothing at all. Most people are harmless. But there is a pattern that repeats enough times for it to be more than coincidence. Predators learn the routines, and they exploit them. They use mundane objects because those objects don't raise suspicion. They use friendliness because we are trained to reciprocate it. They use the dark because the dark is good at hiding motion. If there is any comfort in these stories, it's that people did act. Someone called the police, managers changed schedules, co-workers yelled and ran toward the danger. Those small acts of intervention are the bright notes in otherwise dark nights. They matter. They save people. When the Walmart worker screamed, it was the sound that turned a plan into a failure. When the bartender hit the panic button and called for help, it might have been what kept the situation from getting worse. And when the gas station attendant floored it and drove away, they followed the instinct that kept them alive. But the discomfort remains. How many nights are out there that look like ordinary shifts and are actually rehearsals? How many times does a stranger get to rehearse the lines before they step into the doorway of real harm? These are not rhetorical questions I have answers for. They're the kind you carry around like a stone in your pocket. So what do we do with these stories? We tell them. We put them on the record. We ask people to check in on friends who work nights and to recognize that the ordinary can be weaponized. We advocate for better lighting, for reliable cameras, for buddy systems, not because these measures are foolproof, but because they reduce the spaces where plans can take root. We hold open the conversation about surveillance and privacy and the ways people can be targeted. We don't offer easy fixes. We don't promise that predators will be caught tomorrow. We just pass along the markers. If you've been listening and you work nights, you know what I mean when I say the lights can lie. They can make us feel like we see everything while only revealing the surface. The shadows move in the spaces we assume are safe. The worst nights don't always end with headlines. Sometimes they end with people who quit their shifts and rearrange their lives, with names never shouted in courtrooms and with footage that never quite shows the full picture. I close this collection with the same feeling I had when I started, unease, but also urgency. There's a dignity in telling these stories aloud. There's a duty, too. You who listen are part of the audience that makes these events noticed instead of invisible. Talk to the people you know who work nights. Check on them. Don't treat their odd little fears as dramatics. They are inventory items on a list we all should read. If you want more of these true night shift stories, there are more I collected. Stories that twist and stories that end quietly. If you survived this video and you're feeling the weight of it, subscribe and check the playlist for more. And the last thing I'll leave you with is this: the lights will come on, the clocks will tick, and the night will seem ordinary. But ordinary is only the name for what hasn't been exposed yet. Keep your eyes open for the small things. They are how danger tends to enter. There are thousands of late shifts played out across parking lots and aisles and barroom stools. Most of them harmless, a few of them not. The chilling part isn't that bad things sometimes happen. It's that they happen in the places we think are safe, simply because we're the only ones there to notice.